Hello, fellow human. This is day 4. Well, technically it's not. Technically, this is day 5. I did record yesterday on what was the actual day 4, but for some reason, my audio didn't capture. So I'm gonna do day 4 on day 5, and then I'm also gonna do day 5 on day 5. I think it keeps with the spirit of the challenge. So welcome to day 4 of my 30-day Talk to Camera challenge. The topic for today is to discuss a skill or interest. And I think the skill I want to talk about is risk planning. Specifically, risk planning as it relates to projects. Now, some projects might be large enough, or the project team might be comprehensive enough that you have a specialized risk manager or a risk specialist. But if you don't have one on your team, it typically falls on the project manager to lead up the risk management effort. Something important to think about, or to understand at least, is that in terms of how I'm using the word risk, it means something in the future that may have an impact on your project. And that's a thing that might potentially happen. Most people assume risk to be a negative thing. But that's not always the case. Or risk is just an unknown. It's possible that that risk is negative, and if it comes to pass, then it becomes an issue. But it is also possible that the risk is positive. And if it comes to pass, it's an opportunity. Let me give you a brief example set in the current moment. Our new president has decided to levy taxes on Canada. And let's say for this particular example that I am a home builder. And the president has said that the taxes are going to take effect in 2 weeks, for example. That's a risk to my project because we use wood, and we get a lot of our wood from Canada, our lumber. So there will be a point in time, based on everything we know now, where the price of our materials for the project might go up. That is a risk, and if it came to pass, that would be an issue. And it's something we should plan for because there's a reasonable chance it would happen, and it would have a semi-significant effect on the project. Let's look about it the other way. And we'll say that we are in a situation where there are tariffs that exist on our materials. And perhaps the president has said that he's going to get rid of those tariffs. That is also a risk. It's something that may happen in the future that would have an effect on our project. But in this specific example, it's a positive risk. Because if that came to pass and tariffs were removed, then it stands to reason that the project materials might be less expensive. So in this way, you can see that a risk can be positive or negative. And if it's a negative one that comes to pass, it turns into an issue. If it's a positive one that comes to pass, it's an opportunity. So that's risk. What you can do at the beginning of a project to really get to hit the ground running on your risk planning is to see if your organization, for example, keeps lessons learned for their projects. You could always look at the lessons learned register for a project that has a similar scope that yours might have. And you can learn a lot from that project team. What risks did they plan for? What risks came to pass and turned into either issues or opportunities? How did they mitigate those risks? How did it impact their projects, et cetera, et cetera? So that's one good way to get get a good list of potential risks for your project so you're not reduplicating the work of others, and you're taking advantage of organizational knowledge, so to speak. Sweet trash cans. Another way that you can get a leg up on your risk planning is to involve experts. So maybe the director of your particular discipline. You ask them about the project you're doing and you say, do you have any advice, or from your experience in your career, what kind of risks have you experienced or have you planned for? And another great way, which might be the best in our current era, is to use ChatGPT or some other generative AI, whether it's standalone like a GPT or a Gemini or something. But there's also tools that are now leveraging AI. For example, RaidLog is a tool where you can type in the description of your project and the AI will search the databases it has access to, and it'll spit out a list of the most common risks that your project type is going to face. All of that to say that there's a number of ways that you can get a list of pre-populated risks that you don't have to spend the effort in developing yourself. And there's a number of different avenues to do it. So another important thing about risk is that everybody on the team should be involved in the conversations about risk. Not only your sponsor or your executive stakeholders, but also your team members. And this is because more eyes on a potential problem is usually going to lead to a better outcome in identifying the problem and planning for the problem or opportunity again. I'm just going to, instead of saying issue or opportunity, I'm just going to shift to talking about risks as negative, because if we're honest, that's what most sponsors care about, is negative impacts. So we've got the team in a room, and we're going to spend some time talking about project risks as a team. And the first thing we want to do is put together some sort of log. It can just be an Excel spreadsheet, or it could be part of a larger RAID log. RAID is a term that stands for risks, actions, issues, and decisions, RAID, and they're kind of managed all together. But let's just say you have a standalone risk log. It's just a Excel spreadsheet. The first thing you want to do is give your risk a name and potentially a number also, to make it more easy to talk about, to reference it to other people. You can say risk item number, whatever. You want a name, you want a number usually, and a brief description of the risk. That's your starting point. Once you have a list of these things as a group, you can go through them and talk about, how important are these risks? And the best way to determine how much effort you should spend talking about a particular risk is to give it a risk score. A risk score is typically broken down into two individual numbers that we multiply together. It's the risk probability and the risk impact. In my experience, I give each of these a score of 1 through 5, 1 being low and 5 being high. That is to say, for the risk probability, how likely is this to occur? And I'll give it a 1 if it's a moonshot. It probably won't happen. It is unlikely to happen, as a matter of fact. And I'll give it a score of 5 if it is highly likely to happen. The other score we want to give is a risk impact score. And what that means is, if this were to occur, this particular risk, how significant of an effect would it have on our project? And again, I'll give it a 1 if it is a very, very little impact, maybe even negligible, and give it a 5 if extremely significant impact. It might derail the project, or there might be a reason to cancel it completely at that point. So we've got these two numbers, probability and impact. They've both been given a score between 1 and 5 to represent whatever's appropriate for the probability or impact. And now to get the total risk score, we just multiply those together. So as you can see, if a probability and impact of a risk are both ranked as number 1, your risk score is going to be 1. If they're both 5s, your risk score is going to be 25. So we're working within a range of 1 to 25. This is really good because it gives us a metric to understand how important a risk is and how much effort we should put into it. It doesn't make sense to spend a bunch of time and effort planning for and mitigating risks with a risk score of 1. You would be chasing your tail all day long. But it is also important to know that there is a certain threshold past which we do want to put some significant effort towards identifying, talking about, understanding risks and tracking them and things of that nature. So as a team, including your sponsor, or potentially your client, you get together and you talk about what is our threshold. Maybe something that has a probability score of 3 and an impact score of 3 that comes out to a total risk score of 9. Maybe you determine that's our threshold. Anything 9 or above, we are going to come up with fully fleshed risk management strategies for those particular items. And anything less, we'll just document that we talked about it, we brought it up, but it stops there. This is good for a couple of reasons. Mostly as CYA. If you've been in project management long enough, perhaps you've been called to court to testify about something, or maybe a client is unhappy and comes back and sues the company that you were working for or something of that nature. Having this documentation that you identified a risk, you brought it up to the team and sponsor, and you gave it a score that didn't warrant any further investigation or tracking or management. That's really good to protect yourself, protect your company. And so that's why thorough documentation really is incredible. Documentation is king. So let's say, for example, on our team, we've decided that a risk score of 9 or above is something that we're going to spend some time talking about. And we have this list of risks that we've collected from either a lessons learned log or a previous experience from experts, or perhaps generative AI, or any other way that we come up with our list of risks that we're going to be talking about. And each one of those by now has a name and a description and a number, and you've given a probability score and an impact score and a total risk score. So now anything above that threshold we're going to pay attention to and we're going to start talking about. We're going to come up with some management strategies. One of the things we want to do is to determine what our risk mitigation strategy is. There's a number of them. For example, you can accept the risk, which is to say you don't do anything about it other than paying attention to it. You could transfer the risk. So for example, maybe you take out an insurance policy on that particular risk from happening, so that transfers the risk to the insurance company. You can reject the risk, or more commonly known as avoiding the risk. And in that situation, you may refuse the piece of work that is going to cause the risk in the first place. You could escalate the risk, so that is to say, get your executive stakeholders, your sponsors involved. Maybe they can bring some more resources to the team. Maybe they have some personal connections that can help de-risk the particular situation. Or you can mitigate the risk, and that is to say somebody's watching and you make small changes in the project overall so that if the risk comes to pass and turns into an issue or an opportunity, that it will have a lesser impact on your project team. So once you've understood your strategy, You typically want to assign an owner to that risk, so somebody who's going to be keeping their eyes on the particular risk as you move through the life cycle of the project. It is also appropriate to make changes to your risk management strategy throughout, depending on the context of the project and the dynamic of the risk as you move through time. And you set up typically a communications plan for the risk. So if the thing happens, you've got a plan of action. You can get to work without having to reach out to people for approvals. This is super beneficial because a lot of times we know time is of the essence, especially when something goes wrong on a project. And if you've already predetermined your course of action, and you can get to work on coming up with a remedy for whatever issue has taken place, you're ahead of the ball game. Again, more importantly than that is getting approval from your executives so that if a risk or issue comes to pass, a risk comes to pass and turns into either an issue or an opportunity, that no one can say that they didn't know what was going to happen or that you took actions that were inappropriate for the situation. And as you move through time, of course, new risks will develop. Old risks will fall off. For example, earlier in the video, we talked about a risk concerning your materials for the project. If you pass that point in time where you expected a thing to happen and it doesn't happen, and now you know that it's not going to happen, you can remove it from the risk register, or at least close it as an open risk item. You don't want to remove it. You want to keep that documentation there. So it's appropriate to revisit the risk log as a team, talk about new risks, talk about old risks that are now closed, talk about any risks whose dynamic has changed throughout the course of the project, and sometimes you have to replan for these risks. And I think that's about it for today. Of course, risk management is, I think, its own discipline, actually. And there are specialists who devote their entire careers to risk planning and risk management. So this is only the tip of the iceberg. If you are interested in risk management and you want to know more about it, always feel free to reach out. If I don't know the answer, I can point you towards somebody who does. I hope you guys have a great day. Keep on keeping on. Ciao.